Students, today we are going to do English text of Standard 6th, and the name of the lesson is Making Friends by Louisa May Alcott. The characters of the story are Joe, Meg, Beth, Amy, grandfather, and Lawrence. Before moving on to the explanation of the lesson Making Friends, let us know about the author Louisa May Alcott. She was an American novelist. She is best known for the novel Little Women and its sequels Little Men and Joe's Boys. Most of her stories are based on her childhood experiences and are set in Concord, Massachusetts. This is a story about four sisters who were interested to know about the neighbors who was living next door. They were worried about the neighbor and wanted to be friend with him. Now students, I am going to explain you the lesson Making Friends. Meg, Joe, Beth and Emmy were four March sisters who lived near the Lawrence house. It was a snowy afternoon. Joe was ready to clean the snow from the path all around the garden, separating the Lawrence house. Both these houses were in the suburbs of the city, which was still country-like with groves, lawn, large gardens and quiet streets. March House was an old brown house looking rather bare and shabby, whereas Lawrence House was a stately stone mansion filled with comfort and luxury. Joe always wanted to see this enchanted palace and hence wanted to know the Lawrence boy. But he had not been seen lately and she thought that he had gone away. But one day she spied a brown face at an upper window. The brown face was looking wistfully down into the garden, where Beth and Emmy were snowballing on one another. Joe felt that Lawrence's boy, Laurie, was suffering for society and fun because his grandpa does not know what good's for him and keeps him shut up all alone. So he needs somebody young and lively. Joe wished to make the boy's grandpa understand the reason for Laurie's sickness. One day, Joe saw Mr. Lawrence drive off and went away from his house. Taking this advantage, she went into Lawrence's house. Joe saw a curly boy leaning on a thin hand at the upper window. Joe threw a handful of snow on the window, and suddenly the head turned at once. The face lost its listless look. The big eye brightened, and the mouth began to smile. Joe asked Laurie whether he was sick. Laurie didn't reply, and he just opened the window. And Laurie told her that he had a bad cold and hence he is shut up for a week. Joe asked him whether he can read books. He told that he is not interested in reading books. Joe entered Laurie's house with a covered dish in one hand and Beth's three kittens in the other. She told Laurie that Mother had sent her love for him. Laurie was glad to see the dish and kittens. Joe entertained Laurie with his enthusiastic conversation. Laurie asked few questions regarding Joe's family. Both of them had a good time and Laurie felt very much enthusiastic and happy after talking to Joe. Laurie told Joe that he often sees in their house through window and loved to see the family sitting with their mother. Joe saw loneliness on the face of Laurie and told him that instead of peeping in our house, we can come to our house without any hesitation. Mother will welcome you and you will have a jolly time. Laurie tells Joe that his grandfather is possessive about him and does not allow to talk to strangers. At this, Joe told Laurie that they are not strangers but neighbors and we want to know you. Laurie took Joe to his library. Joe was delighted to see different rooms and the library full of books, pictures, and little cabinets full of coins and curiosities. Suddenly, the maid came and told Laurie that the doctor wanted to see him. Laurie went to meet the doctor and Joe was standing alone. Now, Joe was standing before a fine portrait of the old gentleman. When the door opened again, without turning, Joe said that he shouldn't be afraid of this gentleman. He isn't as handsome as my grandfather, but I like him. Suddenly, a gruff voice came behind her. Thank you, ma'am. There stood old man Mr. Lawrence. So students, the moral of the story is a good friend is like a four-leaf clover, hard to find and lucky to have. Now students, I am going to read you the lesson Making Friends. What in the world are you going to do now, Joe? Asked Meg one snowy afternoon as her sister came tramping through the hall in rubber boots and hood, a broom in one hand and a shovel in the other. Going out for exercise, answered Joe with a twinkle. Meg went back to toast her feet and read Ivanhoe. And Joe began to dig paths with great energy. The snow was light and she soon swept a path all around the garden which separated the March house from that of Mr. Lawrence. Both stood in a suburb of the city, which was still country-like, with groves and lawns, large gardens and quiet streets. On one side of the low hedge was an old brown house looking rather bare and shabby, robbed of the vines that in summer covered its walls and the flowers which then surrounded it. On the other side was a stately stone mansion, plainly betokening every sort of comfort and luxury from the big coach house and well-kept grounds to the conservatory and the glimpses of lovely things one caught between the rich curtains. To Joe's lively fancy, this fine house seemed a kind of enchanted palace full of splendors and delights. She had long wanted to behold these hidden glories and to know the Lawrence boy. But he had not been seen lately, and Joe began to think he had gone away. When one day she spied a brown face at an upper window, looking wistfully down into their garden, where Beth and Emmy were snowballing one another. "That boy is suffering for society and fun," she said to herself. "His grandpa does not know what's good for him and keeps him shut up all alone. He needs somebody young and lively. I have a great mind to go over and tell the old gentleman so." The idea amused Joe, who liked to do daring things. The plan was not forgotten, and when the snowy afternoon came, Joe resolved to try what could be done. She saw Mr. Lawrence drive off and then sailed out to dig her way down to the hedge, where she paused and took a survey. All quiet, nothing human visible but a curly black head leaning on a thin hand at the upper window. "I'll toss up a snowball and make him look out," Joe thought. Up went a handful of soft snow and the head turned at once. The face lost its listless look. The big eyes brightened and the mouth began to smile. Joe nodded and laughed as she called, "How do you do? Are you sick?" Laurie opened the window and croaked, "Better, thank you. I have had a bad cold and been shut up for a week." "I'm sorry. What do you amuse yourself with? Don't you read?" "Not much. They won't let me." "Can't somebody read to you?" "Grandpa does sometimes, but my books don't interest him, and I hate to ask Brooke all the time." "Have someone come and see you then." "There isn't anyone I would like to see. Boys make such a row." "Isn't there any nice girl who would read and amuse you?" "Don't know any." "You know us?" began Joe, then laughed and stopped. "So I do." "Will you come, please?" cried Laurie. "I'm not quite a nice, but I will come. If mother will let me. I'll go and ask her. Shut that window like a good boy." With that, Joe shouldered her broom and marched into the house, wondering what they would all say to her. Laurie was in a flutter of excitement at the idea of having company and flew about to get ready. Presently there came a loud ring, then a decided voice asking for Mr. Lorry, and a servant came to announce a young lady. "All right, show her up. It's Miss Joe," said Laurie, going to the door of his little parlor to meet Joe, who appeared with a covered dish in one hand and Bet's 3 kittens in the other. "Here I am, bag and baggage," she said briskly. "Mother sent her love and was glad if I could do anything for you. Meg wanted me to bring some of her blancmange and Beth thought her cats would be comforting. I knew you would laugh at them, but I couldn't refuse." It so happened that Beth's funny loan was just the thing for in laughing over the kittens. Laurie forgot his bashfulness. "That looks too pretty to eat," he said, smiling with pleasure as Joe uncovered the blancmange. "Tell the girl to put it away for your tea. It's so simple it will slip down without hurting your sore throat. I came to amuse you. Shall I read aloud?" "Thank you. I have read all those if you don't mind." "I would rather talk," answered Laurie. "Not a bit. I'll talk all day. Beth says I never know when to stop." "Is Beth the rosy one who stays at home a good deal and sometimes goes out with a little basket?" asked Laurie with interest. "Yes, she's my girl and a regular good one she is too. The pretty one is Meg and the curly-haired one is Amy." "How did you find that out?" Laurie colored but answered frankly. "Why, you see, I often hear you calling to one another, and I can't help looking over at your house. I beg your pardon for being so rude, but sometimes you forgot to put down the curtain at the window where the flowers are, and when the lamps are lighted, it's like looking at a picture to see the fire, and you all around the table with your mother. Her face is right opposite, and it looks so sweet behind the flowers. I haven't got any mother, you know." And Laurie poked the fire to hide a little twitching of the lips that he could not control. The solitary, hungry look in his eyes went straight to the Joe's warm heart. Laurie was sick and lonely, and feeling how rich she was in home, love, and happiness. She gladly tried to share it with him. Her sharp voice was unusually gentle as she said, "We'll never draw that curtain any more, and I give you leave to look as much as you like. I just wish, though, instead of peeping, you would come over and see us. Mother is so splendid, she would do you heaps of good, and we would have jolly times. Wouldn't your grandpa let you?" "I think he would if your mother asked him. He's very kind and he lets me do what I like, pretty much, only he's afraid I might be a bother to strangers," began Laurie. "We are not strangers, we are neighbors, and you need not think you would be a bother. We want to know you." Then they got to talking about books, and to Joe's delight, she found that he loved them as well as she did. "Come down and see our library," said Laurie, getting up. "Grandpa is out, so you need not be afraid." "I'm not afraid of anything," returned Jo, with a toss of her head. Laurie led the way from room to room. At last they came to the library, where she clapped her hands and pranced, as she always did when delighted. It was lined with books, and there were pictures and statues and distracting little cabinets full of coins and curiosities. "The doctor to see you, sir," the maid beckoned as she spoke. Laurie went away, and Jo was standing before a fine portrait of the old gentleman when the door opened again. Without turning, she said, "I'm sure that I shouldn't be afraid of him, for he's got kind eyes, though his mouth is grim, and he looks as if he had a tremendous will. He isn't as handsome as my grandfather, but I like him." "Thank you, ma'am," said a gruff voice behind her, and there, to her great dismay, stood old Mr. Lawrence.